katoa, iho ma, no mai, haere mai, ko te pāpaki tākaro o StayMe Always, bringing it to you organic, live and dynamic. Now bring me your cups. Now look, honestly George, I don't know what it's like where you are, but it is so hot, so I'm going to have to get my 1.5 litre of water because it has been absolutely hot up this way.
Water.
and let's dip into the healing well. So I am privileged to have a good friend of Teaser Created here with us today, George Lake. And what we really appreciate you jumping on the show. Obviously, we have just been talking very briefly just before we started. And as I've been sharing with all our viewers, this show is a safe space for men and women to come to try and find some information or some help and support. And the show's based on my 3 totem poles, so mental well-being, emotional wellness, and spiritual awareness. And the show is all about different people and their lives, their backgrounds, their culture, and we're actually really happy to have you on the show. So thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it, George.
Cool, kia ora. Good to be here.
Fantastic. Well, look, before we get into it, because I usually have a case of just jumping straight in, because I can't wait, I have to calm down and relax and actually start off with the right procedures. So look, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, George, where you're from, what you're up to and what you're currently doing at the moment.
Okay. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko George Lake tōku ingoa. No Ngāti Maniapoto, Te Atiawa, me Ngāti Pikia, Oku Iwi. Grew up in Paraparumu, so Kapiti Coast. So yeah, had a really good childhood there. And then, yeah, just worked lots of different jobs. You know, everyone goes through the old pack and save there when you're a teenager. And then I decided that wasn't for me. So I ended up going to university to study statistics. And I didn't know any Māori at all. And this kaumātua come up to me and said, "Oh, kia ora e hoa." And I didn't even know what e hoa was. And I decided to do some Māori studies papers just for an interest to sort of see, oh, you know, I'm Māori, I might as well see what these things are about. And then just really changed the path that I took and decided to not do a statistics degree and pursue a Māori studies degree. And from there, improved my reo, got my degree, and then wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. So I moved down to Queenstown and I did a little bit of DJing and working in a bar down there. Realized that I couldn't do that until I was 65, so I decided to move back to Wellington, and I did my graduate diploma in teaching. And I've been teaching high school ever since. And recently, last year, I went to yoga teacher training course, and that was done through Awhi Yoga, which is run by Jace Te Patu and Justine Hamill, a yoga studio that was formerly Power Living, but they've changed and rebranded it to Awhi Yoga, so AWHI. And I've been teaching yoga there on Tuesday mornings since around about March this year. So yeah, so high school teacher and yoga teacher, and still a student of Te Reo Māori. So it's pretty much the main parts of me, I guess.
So yes, we're both on a journey to prove our reo. I must admit, I apologise every show because I have a tendency to enunciate, so I'll say that now. Apologies. We spoke earlier, and yeah, you mentioned that you were living in Melbourne for a number of years. You were also teaching over there, and then you came back to New Zealand. So do you just want to give us a bit of a glimpse in terms of what it was like teaching over in Melbourne to then come back into New Zealand? But I think prior to Melbourne, you were also teaching as well. So just the different cultural changes and differences that you found.
Yeah. Well, my first 2 years, I was teaching at a place called St. Pat's in Silverstream, which is quite a well-known high school for rugby in New Zealand. And it's an all-boys Catholic school. So I was going from an all-boys Catholic school where majority were Pākehā. So we're going from that and then moving over to Melbourne, where I was teaching there for 5 years, and there was a big community of students like from Afghanistan. And so to go from an all-boys Catholic school to going to a place where there's all these students, and they're all wearing hijabs if they're from Afghanistan, and that was quite a big culture shock for me because I wasn't used to that, and you just don't have those numbers like in Wellington, where you didn't used to. And so going from that transition from all boys to co-ed was quite a big change, and I also noticed, like, living in Melbourne, just even that change with the Australian culture compared to New Zealand culture as well. You're surrounded by a lot more people. It's a different culture. And I remember saying when I first went to the school that I was teaching at in Melbourne, I remember saying to one of the teachers, like when you go to a different part of the country, if you're from like a different iwi, a different tribe, you'll go and acknowledge the mana whenua, the tangata whenua of that region, to let them know who you are and your purpose of being in their region. And I was saying to the teacher, when I came to Melbourne, I didn't know where to go. Like, I didn't know who the tangata whenua were of that region, who I go to, just introduce myself, and it's just different there. It's just different there, like it was really hard to find the Indigenous people there, got to meet a family from there, but it's just a whole different setup there. And then obviously enjoyed it. It was a good learning curve. And then I've been back here where I've been teaching at an all-girls school. So I've taught all three different types now. So all boys, mixed, and all girls. Previous to coming back from Melbourne, I actually did 3 months volunteer work in Africa. So I was volunteering, just teaching and coaching touch rugby and rugby over there. So we went to Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Malawi. And then I got an email from the principal of the school I'm at now, and she said, I know that you're volunteering in Africa, but can we interest you and entice you to come back and live in New Zealand? And so I decided to take up the job offer. I took that as a sign to move home. So here I've been back for 3 years now, teaching at an all-girls school, and where I've been teaching PE, health, well-being, filling in sometimes for the junior te reo classes because they find it quite difficult to find te reo Māori teachers. So that's where I'm at the moment.
We talk a lot about identity, especially for our young male and just male in general. And you've been in a really great position because you've seen multiple different cultures. You've been immersed into these cultures to then start in New Zealand, to then go over to Melbourne, do a stint in Africa, then come back home again. How important do you believe is actually knowing your identity and the effect it can actually have on your overall emotional and mental well-being?
I think it just gives you the confidence to know that you can explore the world and know that when you come home, there's your tūranga waiwa, your place to stand. So no matter how far away from home you are, you know that there's a place you belong. So for me, I guess I really relied a lot on my tāmoko on my shoulder that, I always take a piece of home with me. So if I'm ever getting homesick, I'll, roll my sleeve up and look at that and touch it and talk to my tipuna, my ancestors. If I'm feeling a little bit, a little bit muki, a little bit sad for home, they're always with me, and it just gives you that confidence to know that you can travel the world, be supported, I guess spiritually, but also know that identity is important, so that when you do meet people from different cultures, really trying to like embrace their identity as well. The power of learning another culture's words. If they see you trying to speak their reo, man, just so many more doors open. For instance, going to Kenya and speaking Swahili, and their vowel sounds are the same as us. And so they're cracking up, like I'm reading all of these signs, and they're like, "Man, you read it like exactly like Swahili should be spoken," you know. And I said, "Oh, because Te Reo Māori is similar sounds." And yeah, I think that helped people to be more open when they see you giving it a go.
Yeah, fantastic. With identity, and we're just talking also about cultures and the different cultures that you were immersed in. Just give us a bit of an understanding, because I've lived in Australia for, I think it was about maybe 8 years, so I totally understand the Australian culture. I don't understand the Indigenous culture. But for yourself, what would you see the difference to be with the Australians and then the Kiwis, and then also, going over to Africa? Is there a stark difference between the three cultures? Are there similarities?
Um, I guess I can only speak from what I observed while I was over there. I mean, obviously, the Australians I met were amazing people. The people who were working at this school cared so much for the refugee community that they would, do so much in terms of time. And, like we would be buying like school uniform and shoes. Like, but this is like for all students. This isn't just for a specific culture or ethnicity. This was just for all of our students that might not have like school shoes. So little things like that, like that teachers would be putting their hands in their own pockets to pay for things to help these students out, and not expecting anything back from the parents, because when you're a refugee family coming here, like you're going to struggle. Like, oh, sorry, when you're moving to Melbourne, you're going to struggle. So, like anything, like even little things like that, if we can help out by helping out with uniform and things like that, then obviously we did. I guess comparing it to like the Australian culture that I saw in general, I guess people are not as trusting as Kiwis. I think as Kiwis we're a little bit more trusting, or maybe naive. I'm not too sure. But like I remember like going and watching a rugby game, and I bought some of the Australian teachers, and we went and watched a rugby game, and I was yarning to another Kiwi there that I'd met in the bar. And, one of them was like, "Oh, do you know that guy?" And I'm like, "No, that's just how we talk to each other," And they were like shocked, like how we talk. We're like, as if we're like best mates that we've seen, and they sort of don't really have that. And yeah, I think that's the one thing I'm really fortunate to be a Kiwi, is that we could see another Kiwi like any other part in the world, and we could still have that, where I'm not too sure if it would be like that with Australians. Like I remember being in Toronto and seeing a guy from Gore and just talking to him, just bumping in the street. We just heard each other's accents and just yarning away, and same thing, like people think we know each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, because I'm much the same as you. I've travelled all over the world. I've lived in New York, LA, Shanghai, London, and it's the same thing. Doesn't matter where you go in the world, and that's what's unique to our Kiwi culture, and obviously what underpins our Kiwi culture is our Māori culture, and yeah, exactly the same response no matter where you go. And it's ironic too in cases, because we probably gravitate towards each other with more impetus and faster overseas than we do here back home.
Yeah, that's true, eh? Having that connection, brings you together.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I loved how previous to the show we were talking about well-being, and you have classes that you're currently doing with your girls. What I'd love to know is, when you were overseas, now that you're back, well-being, emotional wellness, it's so big nowadays. COVID has absolutely turned our world upside down and has caused so much disruption. And I'm not taking away the fact that it wasn't as prominent before pre-COVID, but it just goes to show, because of the effect it's had, it's something as a whole, as a community, we really need to be addressing it a lot more so than we have ever before. So what sort of things do you do with your students to help them? Because the way that they see the world will be very different to the way that we possibly see the world due to culture and age, possibly.
I guess for me, I've really been focusing on the importance of simplifying things. So at the start of the year, we were focusing on meditating or 5-minute reflection, however they wanted to call it, to interpret it to serve them. Just 5 minutes before class, where they just sit in stillness, and they all bought into it. They were really good with that. And then I thought, as the time came on, I guess I started to realize that a lot of the students, 5 minutes in silence is actually quite scary for a few of them. So then it came into trying to do like creative things with them. So really simple things like mandala drawing, just giving them that time to themselves, so that, you know, despite all of the talk on the outside world, what's going on, if they can just focus on, you know, this coloring, just coloring in this page, which seems so simple, but it gives your mind just that time to focus on just that one thing and just give your brain a little bit of escape. I really found that they, you know, something so simple just really helped them, just to de-stress, and just really simple things, you know, like drawing a squiggle on a line and getting them to create something, making their own art. So really trying to take advantage of their creativity to just let them have a little bit of just time out and not having to worry about things like that. Because they know what's going on, you know, they're following the news exactly like us. You know, I remember when there was a COVID case down here, I saw one of my students in a cafe, and she knew before me that someone who had COVID had visited the cafe that her and I were in, but she had left as I was going in. She was leaving with her family, and she was the one that told me that he was there. So if it wasn't for her, that means I had to isolate for a couple of weeks from school. But it goes to show how alert students are. You know, she knew before me and she let me know, and she tried to do it in a way so that um, she did it respectfully and privately. So she didn't say it in front of the class like, "Sir, like you were there when I was there." You know, she took me to the side, was respectful and things like that. So it goes to show that the students are very aware of what's going on, and it's not really our place to tell them and update them on what things are happening, because they know what's going on in the world. So I'm talking about year 12 students, so sort of 15, 16, 17 years old. They're very aware of what's happening, and I guess my job as a wellbeing teacher is just to try and give them a little bit of escape from that, you know, for a little bit at a time, or else they're just getting overwhelmed. And you don't really want that, especially this time of the year when they've got end of year exams coming up too. So I'm just trying to, you know, to simplify things to just keep them a little bit more, you know, de-stressed and calm.
That's hard. Like I admit, having two children, trying to work my way through life, kids, job, family, friends. You know, that's full on as it is. So I can only imagine what it would be like for students. And with your students, with both dealing with females and males, what is the biggest, I suppose, area that they focus on where they become quite stressed and possibly erratic? Is there common things, or is there something similar, or is it totally different when it comes to males and females?
I guess comparing, you know, obviously only from my opinion, I guess the female students sort of seem to put a heck of a lot more pressure on themselves as a whole, as a collective. They seem to, really want to do well. Like I remember first going to that school, and I sort of said to them, you know, what sort of pressures are there on you at the school? And they're sort of, you know, like most of them are like excellence or nothing. You know, if you get a merit, you're a failure. And I found that really, you know, really sad. Like that they were defining themselves by like these marks that they get. And you know, as a teacher, you just want to to actually let them know that they're obviously so much more than just the grades that they get. And you know, like at the school that I'm at, they're very driven. Compared to the boys, I think the boys, I think obviously do care about their education, but aren't overwhelmed like the female students are. I think the female students just really work themselves up. Like they have like more direction in knowing where they want to go after high school, where I think the male students a little bit more open to what their path is. Like their paths don't seem to be as direct as the female students. Mm.
Do you find with the students as well that mental illness and health, is that prominent with the students? Do you have experiences where you've got you know family in terms of domestic violence or sexual violence or suicide? Is that common with students you've dealt with?
In Melbourne, previous to leaving, there was one student where that happened. But at the schools in New Zealand, haven't had to deal with anything like that, fortunately. But obviously in Melbourne, you could see how hard it hit the community there. Like the only tangi that I've been to here is just from a really tragic accident of one of our boys, being hit while he was on his bike and unfortunately passing away. But in terms of suicide or anything like that, domestic violence, there's been nothing that I know of that we've had to deal with here.
And do you undergo specific training being a teacher in terms of knowing how to deal with that kind of thing?
I haven't at school, but I did visit a website called Life Keepers, and they sort of give you like this introduction to how to deal with things, when something like suicide happens. It's sort of like this free introductory course that you can do over a couple of hours that'll sort of help you to deal with those things if you need to sort of overcome those sort of problems. And so it just gives you a bit of insight on how to support people going through that, or any students who you can refer them to and things like that.
Yeah, we have a charitable where also we have a business, an Amazon business, and some of the proceeds from our Amazon business we're actually putting forward to suicide prevention and cancer awareness, etc. In the role that I work in, I have anywhere between 100 and 150 women, and these are the things that we have to deal with on the daily. So I'm definitely an advocate for supporting those particular groups and committees, etc., to try and push it out there a bit more to build awareness and knowledge and experience, etc.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember going to a PE conference at the end of term 2 and just seeing the statistics for suicide, per capita in New Zealand compared to the rest of the world is so high. It's just, and that's sort of what got me on the path of jumping onto that Life Keepers website to sort of think, because statistics for Māori and male are pretty astronomical. And so I thought if there's anything that I can do to help, even though I'm at an all-female school where the majority are Pākehā, but still still being a part of the community, obviously through whānau, and local iwi and that. So if I can help, I obviously make myself available.
I think it's really important that people are aware that obviously that suicide, any kind of malady, any kind of affliction, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter whether you're Māori, whether you're Pākehā, whether you're Afghani, whether you're United Arab Emirati. It doesn't discriminate, and I think with you and watching your journey and watching a global shift in consciousness that's sweeping the world over, where it used to be males, oh, you got to be the staunch, tough, hard guy, you know, the kill the whānau, and what's actually happening is we're watching a whole reversal of the psyche of the male, and where we're becoming more sensitive, we're becoming more delicate, we're becoming a lot more softer with the way we treat people and how we treat ourselves especially. And I noticed that when I was watching your journey, and then I clicked in major when I came back home, reconnected, and you're talking about Turanga Waiwai. Our Turanga Waiwai, where we plant our, not just our physical feet, but our spiritual feet. And then that fills our cups, and then we can sojourn overseas. But yeah, watching your journey has been amazing, my bro. And to actually know you personally and know what we used to be like at uni, little hiangas, and then what now, like I feel good about myself growing into some kind of spiritual wisdom and maturity, because ultimately that's what it comes down to, is maturity.
Yeah, totally agree. I also think it's about having that courage to just be vulnerable too, you know. Like on Facebook, like I created like a group, it's called Special Mention, with a little dash in between the men and the chin, just because I feel like there's places where men don't really get to open up and share how they're feeling, you know, and I just sort of created that little group. There's only a few guys on there, but it just gives us somewhere to just sort of like tell it how it really is, you know, because we're all taking photos of the beach and, you know, the guns and you know, and some of us, if we're still drinking the beers and, you know, having a good time and things like that, but really we all know like that's just the front, you know. Good to appreciate those days like that, obviously, in the sunshine, but also know that it's okay to talk about things when you're not feeling 100%, you know, and knowing that there's a space out there for you to share that.
Totally agree with you.
Mm.
Really. Yeah, I see a lot of cultural significance in terms of the people that are buying into it. So we're talking about these kinds of totem poles and these kinds of elements and components in terms of being vulnerable, to be real, and to express ourselves. And we had another really good friend of mine on the show called Aldean Black, and he's from Papua New Guinea. He lives in Australia, very much the same as us, really eloquent, really good at expressing himself punctiliously, and just really in touch with who he is, and talking to you and other people who are in touch with this side of who they are. And what we're actually doing is we're taking that rough diamond and we're becoming a spiritual jeweler, so to speak, and we're refining ourselves, not to be sophisticated, not to be complex, but to be our authentic selves and being comfortable with that, and then being role models in that space so that others can follow us and do the same thing. And yeah, beautiful, bro. Watching your journey, massive inspiration for me, and because I know you personally.
Yeah, sure there was.
Your page that you created, Special Mention, what sort of suggestions could you make? Because there's so many males and females out there that really just don't know how to be vulnerable. So what sort of things would you suggest? Because I'm sure, you know, talking to your students and maybe some ideas that have come through from your page that you've created, you know, what sort of things would you suggest to us?
Well, I guess like a lot of the things I draw on is probably from, I'm not too sure if you heard of Brene Brown, but she's a shame and vulnerability researcher. And so a lot of the things that she uses, I'll share with the students. So for example, at the start of the year, I gave my students like a tiny piece of paper, like maybe like 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. And I told them on that piece of paper, they write down the people they would trust to tell absolutely anything. And then I asked them, you know, why is this piece of paper so small? And they said, because you only want us to just write a few names of people we really, really trust. So that would probably be one thing that I would recommend to people that aren't too comfortable being vulnerable with others, who would be the people that they would write on their little 1 centimeter square piece of paper that they know they could tell anything and that they could trust? That would probably be a good start. Knowing to reach out for professionals and probably normalizing the pain that they're going through, knowing that, yes, it's tough, yes, it's painful, but they're not alone, and someone else who has been through this and someone else has gotten through the other side as well. So just to let them know that it is possible, even though other people aren't going through the same things as them, there are similarities, and know that there's always support out there. And just, we all understand that struggle, but we're not comparing our struggles. We're here to support each other because of our similarities and struggles.
I love the idea of your page, actually putting that page together, and then having a class around well-being. It really does help. And going forward, students, they're going to understand that life is going to be difficult. That's what life is about, but it's also about understanding different ways and means to get you through to transition. And I know growing up for myself as a child, because we do talk about the first 7 years of our life and the effect that it ultimately does have on us in the end, that there needs to be some form of, I think, different ways in terms of how we're teaching our young ones, and then the stresses of life. And look, that may be a little bit, we're going to have some different opinions, because obviously as a parent, I'm going to perceive the teacher as something possibly a little bit different versus the opposite way around. But I know for my girls coming through, we're always talking about ways to manage their emotions. Well, not manage, but help them to get through the emotions. If something happens that's traumatic, okay, well, what can we do to work through it so then it doesn't have a detrimental effect long term?
Yeah.
And for yourself, we talk a bit about COVID, because ultimately that's how the discussion really came about. So for you, how has COVID affected you? And, have you seen a difference 12 months ago to now?
I guess a little bit. The main difference it affected was, there was one time when I went to visit my mum, and it was the first time that I couldn't hug her, and that just felt really, really weird, But obviously the priority was like, well, if you hug her and she gets sick because of you, then that's probably going to be worse than not being able to hug her right now and knowing that this is just temporary. And and obviously I got to hug her later. But little things like that you take for granted that you can't do. That was probably the big wake up for me. I really tried to focus on my physical well-being during COVID, during lockdown. So just trying to go out on walks by myself, like very fortunate to be living in Wellington, where there's the beaches nearby, or we've got trail walks or little bush walks that you can go on, that are actually really close to where you live, no matter where you live in Wellington. So I think that really helped me with my frame of mind when I was going through lockdown. I was locking down by myself, but I find that okay, because I can talk to my whānau and my friends online, checking in with the students to see how they were going when we weren't at school, things like that. I guess, yeah, the big thing that's helped me is knowing that this is temporary, and you can choose to be overwhelmed by it, or you can choose to just look a little bit further in the future and focus on the things you can do to take care of yourself now, and just know that eventually this all will be in the past and be something that we teach in history to students that weren't here when it first kicked off like it is now.
I love all your ideas. I'm going to look back on the show and go into the site, because I'm contemplating little
some gems, my friend, some gems that you're giving.
It's
It's just
amazing.
just all from books I've read, really, and then just a bit of trial and error.
But what's great is a lot of what you're actually mentioning are things that I do quite regularly, and I do sometimes post on my social media. We call them momentum brushes. So they're different things that you can do to palpate your senses, because ultimately your senses can give you that guidance that you need to lead you through life. And we talk about these things. And I love the fact that you said colouring. I used to think that I was, this grown adult sitting there with my kids colouring, but I absolutely love it because of the reasons that you talked about. So I'm absolutely going to talk about that as well on my posts. A couple of questions really too, also to go slightly off course, but it will bring it back through. Who was your hero growing up, and are they still your hero today?
Yeah, so my grandparents raised me when I was in Paraparumu, because I'm the eldest grandchild. And so, normally the eldest grandchild gets raised up, hopefully to take the traditional practices with them. So when the grandparents pass. But that also meant that my grandfather couldn't sort of come out and, do a lot of sport with me, which was a bit of a shame. So I relied quite a lot on my basketball coach. This guy Angelo Robinson, so he's been around for a long time, and I guess I looked up to him, being a massive basketball fan. So obviously still love basketball now, but I guess if it wasn't for basketball, like times could have been a lot worse. I think there was a lot of frustration around, like my mum's still alive. Why is she not raising me? So I guess there was a lot of anger. Growing up as a teenager, so I was able to sort of channel that into basketball. And then, so I really looked up to him, and he was sort of, the person that I would, run through a brick wall for, and even to this day now, when we catch up, it's very genuine and very heartfelt, and, that guy's whānau to me, obviously, so every time I see him, or I'll remember to write him a gratitude letter, and just let him know, how much he really changed my life and changed the path that I was heading towards. So, yeah, so definitely be him.
You've also talked to me about your childhood and some of the emotions that you went through. Talking to your coach, throwing yourself into basketball. I know that's what I used to do. I used to play basketball as well, not to the same level as yourself. But what other things did you try and do to help transition you through that era and that time frame? Because, being a teenager, your hormones are going 100 miles an hour. You've got the olds and your grandparents probably at you about something. You've got the pressures of basketball and your friends. Like, what other things do you do to kind of keep you sane? That's the right word.
I guess I had a pretty stable relationship at that time, though. So sort of from 17 to about 21, 22, I was with the same partner. So that was probably one thing that kept me quite mature and quite level-headed. Her family and my family were actually very close, like in terms of her family and extended family, and my family and extended family. They knew each other. They were two Māori families from Kapiti Coast. So it meant that, like there was lots of support around us. And I think I've been very lucky in terms of former partners that I've had. So they've sort of helped to keep me on the straight and narrow, I guess. But also, I guess, being from like a big whānau and being brought up in a small town, there's so many cousins and aunties and uncles in that you can't really get up to too much mischief, because there's too many eyes. So that's probably one thing that sort of helps keep you on the straight and narrow as well now,
Tell you what, growing up here in little Lower Hamilton, H-Town, not that it's little anymore, I tell you, I've got one family and they're all on the same street. So, you know what, if I tried to go on down another street, they'd find out to be out on the road hunting me down. So I know the feeling. And it's good that you mentioned it, because relationships definitely help to build your confidence, knowing that you've got people around you that care for you that you can then open up and, like we talked about, to be vulnerable with. And again, that's something that we also talk about on the shows, and the importance around having those key relationships, within your circle. How do you fill your cup?
I guess I fill it up. So I have like a daily meditation practice. So first thing when I wake up in the morning, I meditate for 20 minutes. So it's the first thing I do, because, getting up early, meditate, make the bed, and just having that routine, having those routines that you just do to create habits, good habits, balancing it out between gym and yoga. But then also like making sure that through the weekend there's times where you can actually just relax and zone out and not have to do too much as well. I think we get caught up in that, I need to be doing something sort of state of mind, that if we're resting, we feel guilty for it. And so that's probably one thing that I make sure that I do. I make sure that there's just time just to relax and zone out and not actually be doing anything, which I think is really important, especially in today's society where social media is telling you, like you've got to push through and just keep going and you'll get there. And, you got to sacrifice sleep and just, someone's working harder than you, when really it should be about, how about that people should be working together. And then that's probably a better thing for us, rather than competing against each other. Collaboration is really important.
But I have a tendency to do pretty much so the majority of the time, and I have to stop myself, is I'm constantly, I actually stop. I actually feel really bad that, I'm having a break. I shouldn't be having a break. I should be making the kids lunch or their dinner or baking or doing extracurricular, activities with them. But what we actually need is that wind down and that relaxation process to be able to help us to keep going and keep moving. And what I'm really actually interested in, you spoke about yoga. What is it about yoga that really helps you to rejuvenate? And we spoke about energy and give you that type of energy that just keeps you going.
For me, yoga is all about the breath. So being an asthmatic, that's one thing that's really drawn me into yoga, is learning how to breathe properly and noticing when you're feeling quite agitated, your breath shortens and you start breathing through your chest, and trying to slow your breath so that you're starting to breathe through your puku, through your belly. And just, I guess yoga's really helped me to pick up when things aren't okay, like my breathing changes. That's when I know something's not okay. Obviously with the yoga, like going through the poses and strengthening the body is important. And for me, that breath, helps you mentally, but also spiritually, gets you outside of your little bubble of the things that you think are important to stress about it. They're not actually things that are probably going to matter in a month or in a year or things like that, so just gives me a bit of perspective and time to slow down.
I agree, and I do that a lot when I go walking, like we were talking about previous with that physical awareness. I just find that I could be absolutely fuming because somebody has absolutely ticked me off, not saying who, and just going for that walk, but not here and home, because I've got a treadmill here, because when I'm annoyed sometimes I jump on that, but it's actually about leaving the house, getting into the fresh air, into nature, and like you said, and just breathing in that air and being able to start to calm myself, relax, and bring that heightened of emotion down, to then start thinking level-headedly, which I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, for sure. There's nothing quite like watching the sunset to really put everything in perspective, just sitting there watching the sunset or the sunrise if you get up early enough.
Yeah.
But for me, sunset.
Something about nature. We
Yeah.
had Horo on our show a couple of shows ago, and we were lucky to experience, for me, the first time taonga poro.
Oh, nice.
And just the sounds were absolutely, I was speechless. It literally took me into a trance, and you can see myself on the show and my eyes are closed and I'm just sitting there, and it was just so beautiful, and it just took me back to my childhood, back on the East Coast, going into the bush, searching as a kid, climbing trees, picking all the different the leaves and the branches and building things, but all I could hear was the sound of nature and the birds. It was just amazing.
Yeah, just mesmerizing, eh? Obviously, for me, watching you and your personal growth, and then pondering back to a time when perhaps our tupuna already had this on lock, and then wondering if possibly we're on that journey to get back there. That's what I ponder every day. So I wake up and do the same thing that you do. I'll get up about 4:30, 5 o'clock, do my mahi karakia, aka meditation, and that's however you want to do that. Whānau, there's no set demarcated rules to anything. You do what works for you, and I think that we have a responsibility to actually voice that on the show. Do what works for you. Read as much information as you possibly can, because there's an ocean, a vast ocean of information out there, and there's no one-stop shop like they have at gyms where they try to tell you what your diet should be. We're all very spiritually and bear our DNA, and so you just take bits of information, little nuggets, or the gems that you've been giving us on our show today, bro. Really appreciate all the gems that you've been dropping us, and just the responsibility, I think, for us and other wellness exponents is just to get the message out there to whānau, to people all over the motu, all over the world. You do what works for you, and just read as much as you can, watch as much as you can, and just grab little nuggets out that'll work for you, and you'll know when they're working for you because they'll do the job that you want them to do. I don't know what Jamie's going to say next, but I've got 10 questions and she can give me the nod. Just 10 quick fire questions, but I'll wait for the boss here.
Ready, go.
Yeah. So these are the 10 quick fire questions. I actually made these up for you, but I'm going to do them for every show from henceforth. So Nets or Lakers?
Oh, well, my coach that I look up to, he's from Watts in LA, so I'm Lakers for life.
Yeah. Pork or chicken?
Chicken.
Watercress or puha?
Oh, definitely watercress, definitely.
Pink or green?
Pink or green?
Yeah.
Being a Lakers fan, I'll take pink.
Prince or MJ?
MJ.
Mountain or water?
What was that again?
Mountain or water?
Fountain.
Mountain. Maunga.
Oh. Water.
Snowboard or surf?
Surf.
LAB or meditation music?
Oh. Good friend is the bass player for LAB, so I have to say LAB.
Yeah.
Good choice.
Anya Arapita, fasting or indulging?
Definitely indulging. I can't lie.
Hunting or fishing?
Neither actually. Probably gathering kaimoana.
Okay, that was gonna say next. Now, final one: kina or crayfish?
Ooh, have to go with the cray.
So I'm just gonna share just a little anecdote, whānau. So we're at the privilege of being at Howie Morrison Jr.'s for breakfast on Sunday, and he put a white baked fritter, topped it with an egg, and a lovely half of a crayfish. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, Jamie's gonna gobble it all down. But she'd never eaten crayfish before, so we put some little mayonnaise sauce on it. And I'm looking at her face, and because I know her gesticulation well, and I was like, oh, well, she's actually going to turn down her crayfish tail. So, yeah, just a little anecdote, which is why I made that kino crayfish last.
I'll get there. I swear I'll get there. I'm slowly but surely increasing my appetite for seafood. So anyway, enough about me. But look, before we go, George, maybe just a couple of things that you might want to put out there. If if we had some males or females that were struggling a bit, what would you say? What sort of things can you suggest?
I would probably suggest just talking to a friend that you really trust. I know that just talking to people and not to get advice from them, but just to let you just voice things really helps, because it's different between hearing them in your head and getting them out through and releasing them out into the ether. They're two totally different things, and that's where a good friend can come in to help that. Never be afraid to see a professional. I know there can be stigma around, seeing someone in terms of discussing our mental health. That needs to just stop, and we need to understand that seeing a professional could save our life, and they're probably the two most important things. Having that friend that you can talk to, so that you can actually say the things you're worried about or going through, the pain that you're going through, and seeking professional help. It's such a strong, courageous thing to do, and it's something that could save your life one day.
That's awesome, and I'm very much so an advocate for verbalizing things and explaining to people. Once you make a decision, you have to, first and foremost, you have to make the decision. Once you make the decision, you need to then put it into action. Then once you've put it into action, it's the doing that helps you transition and move forward. There's going to be bumps. There's going to be challenges along the way, but you have to keep going. It's just knowing how to get over that hump and that bump. And the suggestions that you've made today, man, my list is just growing, because all these things are great gems, as Teezy stated, that we need to keep talking about constantly all the time, just so people understand that, yeah, it is actually okay. So look, thank you so much, George, for jumping on the show. I really appreciate it, because I know you've been busy, taking the time to converse with us. And look, enjoy the rest of your week. We'd love to get you back on the show very, very soon as a bit of an update. And yeah, look after yourself. Ngā mihi. Thank you to everybody. Stay tuned for another show that we've got coming up, all about aroha wahine and further shows to do with aroha tāne. Thank you so much.
E te rangatira, e te ao Māori, te ao akonga tauira, Māori, rānei, Pākehā, hei aha te aha, a tēnā rawātu kia koe.
Nā mihi kia korua mo tō mahi tēnei tūmomo mahi e tino whakahirahira. So just wanted to acknowledge the importance of this mahi that you're doing, and this kaupapa is so important. So just thank you for having me on the show, and hopefully it helps, even one person, then we've done our job.
Totally agree. Thank you so much, George.
Hei kōrā, bro.
Kia ora.
Take care.
Matiwa.
Kia ora. Matiwa.
Te wa.